So back in the city, I'm just going to move over to the shading tab. My city text shader. Oh yes, and before I do this, I'm going to change my render settings. I'm going to use Eevee, of course. I just want to make sure ray tracing is on so I can calculate light bounces. Yeah, so just enable ray tracing. I'll switch over to my rendered view up here. Okay, so in my shader window, I'm going to add an emissive shader, emission. So add or Shift A, shader, Shift A, and I can search emission. I'm just going to connect my color from my Tokyo skyline up to my color of my emission. I'm going to add a mix shader to mix the emission and the principled together. So if I add a node, Shift A, search, mix, and I'm not mixing color, I'm mixing shader. So I'm going to select mix shader. I'm just going to drop this on the connecting noodle between principled and the output, and I'll just wire it in for me. And then in my second shader slot, just connect the emission. So you see green dot to green dot, shader connector. And your city should look a little bit brighter at the moment. If I move my slider all the way to the left, I get the first shader, so that's full principled. All the way to the right, it's full emission. So you see it's kind of glowing a bit more when I go full emission. All of the colors are emitting light. As I go back to my principled, it's much darker. So this factor is just saying 50% between the two. I want to use the factor value to decide where the windows are and emit from there. So I'm going to create a color ramp, like the color ramp we used in the generative texture. Shift A, search, color ramp, converter color ramp.
Seamus, where is the ray tracing option again?
It's to enable light bounces, light calculations. Where is it?
Oh, never mind. I see it.
Yeah, it's in the render. Little.
I don't see it on my version. I think I'll have to use a slightly older version.
Yes. So I think if you have the slightly older one that says screen space reflections, yeah, that's what it used to be called. They've changed it to be called ray tracing because it's now using more ray tracing than screen space.
Okay, thank you.
But similar. Anyway, color ramp. And again, we're going to wire up our shader color, our base color, to the factor here. So it's going to take our color image and convert it to a black and white image. And then the color of this will decide how much of the emission and how much of the principal to use. So connect the color to the factor. And just with that one change, by disconnect again, you see it's more of an all over half and half gradient. If I connect that back up, the color to the factor, you'll see the darker parts are staying darker, the lighter parts are staying lighter. We can control which parts are going to be emissive and which parts aren't by adjusting our color ramp. And that's going to crunch down the amount of darkness. So I bring that dark over, it's going to make things a lot darker. Bring that white over, it'll make the whites whiter. So depending on what kind of impact you want the city to have, if you want to be quite dark with glinting lights, bring it quite close. If you want a little bit more of the color to go through, give more space. Just find a value that works for your map. With different images, obviously different values will be more effective. And if you cross over with the color ramp, it's going to look very strange. It's inverted everything. So now the dark parts are bright and the bright parts are dark. If I bring that strength up, you can see it becomes more of that piercing night light. So 300 is probably a bit much. Let's say 10 is fine, or maybe 2. Okay, so next we'll look at adding the antennae, adding some antennas using a particle system. So first I'm going to create an object to be my antenna. It's going to be a cylinder. So I'll just add a new object back in layout. I'm going to add a new object, mesh cylinder. Oh. And you can decide on how thin you want it to be. But we don't have to make it to scale. It's going to be much smaller when we instantiate it as particles. Okay, I'll just put this way up here. I'll give it a name. Antenna. I'll give it a material while I'm at it. Material. Oh wait, no. Antenna. Mat. I'm not going to do too much with it, just bring up the metallic on it because it's a metal bowl. Bring the metallic up, maybe bring the roughness down. Shade smooth. Quick material. Big metallics, a little bit less rough. Okay, so there's my cylinder. Next, I'm going to add the particle system to my city. So particle systems are just below our modifiers. This little symbol right here. So just click the particle properties, and just like everything else, click plus to add a particle system. And if you press play right now, you'll see particles falling off your city. We're not going to use individual particles like this. We're actually going to use a hair emitter. So switch over to hair. And you can see all of the hair on your city. And then down in render, it's saying render as path. I'm going to say render as object. Again, in particle system properties. And it's going to look for the object. Instance object. Let's pick our antenna. You see a whole bunch of antennae are spawned all over our city. We can play around with the number. Maybe bring that lower. Say 100. Oh, and I want to enable advanced because I'm probably going to need to adjust the rotation phase of these so they're sticking out the right way. So enable advanced in particle settings. And if you remember last week, we did a little thing with vertex groups, and we were modeling that cup bot. We're going to do another thing with vertex groups here, where we're going to create a group that's going to store where we're going to spawn our antennae. And right down in particle settings down the bottom, you can see there are vertex groups for density, length, clump, kink. See? So we're going to create a vertex group on our city by jumping into a different mode. Go up to object mode and click down. We want to go to weight paint. So another brush-based system, just like in sculpt mode or in our texture painting mode. F to make things bigger or smaller, Shift F to change the strength. I'm going to leave it at 1. And what I'm going to do is, where's my camera? Where's the front? That way. Okay. So I know this is the front of my city. My camera's looking this way. I'm going to start painting rooftops. Just give them a little dot on top. Okay. Not working. That's good. Ah, there we go. Great. Okay, my brush is probably too small. There we go. Bringing that down to 0 because it's annoying me seeing them in weight paint. Thanks. And control click to remove weight, erase essentially. I think I'm having difficulty because I decimated so much. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to subdivide one more time. There we go. So now I have some vertex to paint right in the center. This won't affect our unwrap. That's cool. And now I should be able to, there we go. That's what I'm looking for. Being able to put a point. Okay, so I recommend at this point subdividing just so we can have some vertex to paint our antennae on. Something I should have considered earlier. So back in edit mode, just subdivide once. I'm going to go back to weight paint. Now I'm just going to set some areas where there's going to be antenna. And I'll go overkill so we can definitely see them when they're instantiated. Okay, that's lots of them. When you're happy with your weight paint, you can go back to our particle system. I'll bring that number back up to 100. You see they're all over the place. And just down in our vertex groups in the particle properties, just for the first one, density. So we're going to control how dense our hair is growing, our antenna hair. Just load in our vertex group we just created. It'll just be called group. We didn't name it in our vertex data properties. Group. And now you can see they're all spawning only where I painted weight. Obviously, we want less of them. And we want the phase. All right, we'll work on the phase first. So we want it to be rotated the right way. So I'm just going to look at the rotation. See if I can get the phase. Oh, it's just rotating around that axis. That is very unhelpful. All right, hang on. Oh. So if I just change to global X, that is pointing straight up. That's kind of what I'm looking for. I just change in rotation, global X. I'll just change to emit from vertices. And that just seems to put one wherever I painted a vertice, which is great. That's all I want, just one at a time.
Seamus, if you wanted to like kind of have it randomized, like some will have one antenna and some have like multiple, maybe two, three, five.
Yeah.
Is there a way to like do that where it's like not all uniform?
Yep, sure is, I think. So we can say emit from faces and then particles per face. 1, 2. So that's giving me 4. And then I can just play with the numbers. The number of spawned until I'm happy. So some of them are getting 2, some of them are getting 3. So just play around with the values. For this, I'm just going to use vertices, so I have 1. 1 per vertex point. You can change the length of the hair, the length of the antenna. And we can also set a scale randomness in our object here so that they're not all exactly the same height or size. By sliding that slider up, that gives you a kind of variance between their sizes. And then a last thing we can do is just to pull them up out of the buildings. This is something we can do in edit mode on the original object. So I'm going to leave weight paint mode, go back to object mode, select my cylinder antenna, and I'll do a split screen. So if I move this up and down in object mode, it doesn't affect anything because the object location is separate. But in edit mode, if I move this whole thing, you see they're all selected in edit mode. They're all instances. So any movements I make in edit mode are going to affect it because it's where the object origin is and where it's moved from there. So I can just pull it up. And of course, we can go in and start modeling this if we want. Add a base to it with a loop cut. Right click, Alt S. So I could add a base real quick. And if we're going to be real extra fancy, we can add some little lights on top of these. We're not going to use lights, we're going to use emissive texture again. And again, very simple, just add a loop cut, bring it up to the top here. I'll just say the whole top here will be my light. This whole top area. And then in materials, I've already got an antenna material for the metallic. I'll add a new slot. I'll call it ant emit. Change its type to emission. Click assign. And you can change its color to wherever you want. Little red lights. Let's give that a value. There's my antenna, our little lights. And then just to put a button on this, we could add some fog using a volume scatter fog box. I'll just do some simple fog. So again, in object mode, I'm going to add a cube, Shift A, mesh cube. Because we didn't change our default plane, it wraps perfectly around our city. I'll name it fog box. And in my shading tab, very simple shader, we're just going to create a volume scatter. So new shader for my fog box. Delete my principled and add a volume scatter. Now, unfortunately, volume doesn't render in Unity, but everything else I'm doing today does. Emission works. So volume, there's what is it, roughness and something like that. Yeah, they don't have glossy, they don't have volume, but there are ways of rendering light passes and light rays in Unity. It's just a little set. And fog, of course. Just a minute. So I'm just going to connect the volume up to the volume output, and then we'll be able to control its density. And it's affected by light as well. So anything we add and change, but you can see there is kind of shadows falling from it. It is tracing that. You can just make some changes to the density of the fog. If you want to add more thickness, you cannot see through it. The color as well, of course, but black will not render as volume. It renders at nothing. It's kind of like an alpha pass. So black just means it's invisible. But colors can be introduced. So you can add a little blue tint or a purple tint to this fog just to add more atmosphere. And then beyond that, adding a kind of a skybox could also help with some lighting, adding some extra stuff. You can use the skybox from last week. And there's a final result. Actually, I'll add a skybox. Why not? Environment, color, environment texture. I'll open up from last week. We just had some clouds or Substance Painter. Nope. There we go. Pure sky. That just adds another lighting thing, but I can turn down the value of that. Oh, it's not showing anymore. Interesting. I can make that darker with the strength value, but I still get some kind of sky. I had a light in my scene that was illuminating all of the fog. I just turned that off for the moment. So now the only light we're getting is from the windows, from the sky, and from our little antenna. I'll save. I'll take a quick render in Eevee first, which will be fast. Here's how it looks in Eevee, and then we can just see for a glamour shot how things are handled in cycles. Oh, they look a bit crazy. So, slots, render slots. There's my first. I'm going to move to slot 2. Let's see how it looks in cycles. So, to switch my render engine, cycles, GPU compute. Sometimes it can help with rendering quicker if you rend in smaller tiles. So this is our tile size down here in performance. Making this smaller can sometimes make your renders a little bit faster, sometimes not. 256 I'll pick for the tile size. I'll take another render, this time in cycles. Do I need denoise? No. Render denoise, yeah. Volumes, motion blur, film, all good. Sorry, James. What were you asking?
Oh, I was just wondering, when you're like selecting computing, so for example, if you're selecting cube and then you move the shading and you want to select something else like reshape, refactor, would you have to then go back into like blend mode, object mode, select it, and then go back into shading mode and reselect it, or
Would you have to go?
so for example, if you're in like wave mode and then you select an object and then you go to shading mode, you then like edit it and then select the object in the hierarchy and keep editing it and shading for the separate object in the hierarchy view, or do you have to go back to wave mode, select a different object and then go back to shading and then shade it?
The second one, yeah. Because if you're one on your, if it opens in edit mode, you're actually editing that one shape. I think you can select two things at once and edit them in edit mode together. But switching between edit mode and shading mode.
Okay.
Haven't tested it though, but it doesn't sound right.
Alright.
Yeah, I'm also getting a problem with this. No, you can do yourself. Nothing's come wrong. should work, it does work. I didn't know how it works in cycles. Now look what's happening to me. That's that like although it is kind of jazzy and cool. Okay, forgot that. I was hoping to show the difference in render, but I don't think it's worth it. Also, it's been another class in 3 minutes. So, thank you very much, everybody. I will see you next week.